The Missing Manatee by Cynthia D. Felice. Today we will read Chapter 3 of the story. In Chapter 3 you will hear the word investigate. Investigate means to carry out a systemic or formal inquiry to discover and examine the facts of an incident or allegation so as to establish the truth. You could use it in a sentence like this. Police are investigating the case of the missing toothbrush. Okay, boys and girls, before we begin this lesson, you need to spend some time gathering your supplies. Today you will need paper and pencil. Let's take a minute to review what happened in Chapter 2. So Skeet brought the sheriff to the crime scene. The manatee was gone, but they could see that someone had been there. He or she had to have had a boat to move the manatee. There were several clues in this chapter. Let's look back in the story in Chapter 2 on page 10. At the bottom it says, "Wait a second, look, somebody was here. Whoever did it tried to smooth it over, see?" Let's think about that. So he or she shot the manatee, left it, and then came back to get it. Let's look at the text on the top of page 11. It says, "Check out those marks in the mud, like something was dragged. Whoever did it tried to smooth it over, see?" So whoever committed this crime tried to cover up their tracks when they came back to get the manatee. Okay, boys and girls, as we are reading, I want you to jot down any clues that you might hear or any questions or thoughts that you might have. Chapter 3. Even with the dead manatee on my mind, I enjoyed the ride back upriver in the sheriff's boat. Earl zoomed through the curves and bends of the river, going close to 60 miles an hour. That felt really fast compared to my skiff, which maxed out at around 25. He throttled down to idle speed when we reached the upper section of the river, where the manatee's refuge began. This was the section Earl and I began talking about, the section that irritated some of the guides who had fast boats and wanted to use them. It was April, and there were still about 200 manatees around. They arrived in October to spend the winter, and some never left when spring came. They were eating and swimming and hanging out in the warm water coming from the spring at the river's source. We passed a bunch of them, lolling contentedly, which is what a manatee should be doing, I thought, not getting ditched someplace with a bullet in its head. We passed other boats too. The river was busy with tourists who came every winter, like the manatees, looking for warmth and relaxation. A good number of boats belonged to local folks who recognized either Earl or me and waved as we passed them. It was spring break, so I wasn't surprised to see some kids from school casting off the pier at the public dock where we idled by. I waved to my friend Lenny. Watching his face as he waved back, I could tell he was wondering what the heck I was doing out with the sheriff's department. When I looked upriver and called to Earl above the engine noise, "Hey, there's Mac!" Earl knew I called my father Mac, but it confused most people. "He's your dad," kids would say. "Why don't you call him Dad?" I'd always shrug and say, "Nicknames run in our family," which was true. I was called Skeet, short for Skeeter, which was short for mosquito. That's what Mac claimed I looked like when I was born. "Why, he's no bigger than a skeeter," he said when he first saw me, or so I've been told. All right, let's stop here, boys and girls. We know that Skeet lives in Florida in a place where many people spend time in boats or on the water. What do we know about the community that he lives in? It seems as though everybody knows each other. This is important when we consider possible suspects. Is there a good possibility that it will be someone Skeet knows? Okay, let's go back into the story. The text says, I've been trying my best to grow ever since. Nobody ever calls me Russell Waters Jr., which is my real name, except for teachers on the first day of school. Then I set them straight. And nobody calls my father Russ or Russell Sr. either, not even Mom. He's Mac. You want to stop? Earl asked me. Since he'd been gone, it seemed I was always wishing I could see Mac about one thing or another. I could pick up the phone anytime I wanted to, or ride my bike a couple of blocks to his place, but it wasn't the same as having him at home. Right then, I wanted to tell him about the manatee in the worst way. But he had a client. Mac had the guy in a good position for casting shrimp to redfish or trout. The guy was standing in the bow, gazing at the water so intently he reminded me of a great blue heron waiting to pounce on a minnow. He looked as if he took his fishing seriously. Nah, I said, I don't want to bother him. Earl nodded. He knew the fishing guide business as well as I did. Keeping the clients happy came first. When we pulled into Larry's marina, Larry himself was pumping gas into a pontoon barge filled with partying vacationers. He gave Earl and me a tired wave as we passed by. The money he made during tourist season was most likely what kept his business going. But he liked to act as though the extra work was killing him. I helped Earl tie up the boat in its slip. As we headed for his patrol car, Blink came out for the shop towards me, grinning from ear to ear, followed by his mangy, flea-bitten dog named Blinky. Blink, the boy, not the dog, was Dirty Dan's son. Dan's official title was Dirty Dan the Tarpon Man. He was the best tarpon fisherman in these parts, probably in the whole state of Florida, maybe even in the entire world. He was also Max and Earl's poker-playing friend, and my hero. I didn't know which of Dirty Dan's 4 wives was Blink's mother. They had all left Dirty Dan because of his single-minded devotion to tarpon fishing, but Blink stayed on. I guess he always would. All right, let's stop here for a second. Some new characters are being introduced in this chapter, and we're learning more about the characters that we've already met. Let's take a minute and jot down some of the new characters that are introduced into the story. What do you know about them? That's right, you may have come up with Skeet and Mac, the sheriff, Dirty Dan, Larry, and now Blink. The text says, I called Blink a boy, but once I asked Mac how old Blink was, and I was astonished when he said he reckoned Blink was about 30. The thing is, something was wrong with Blink when he was born. No matter how old his body got, in his head he'd never be any older than 5 or maybe 6, and that's how he acted. If I ever knew his real name, I'd forgotten it. Everybody called him Blink, even Dirty Dan. It was on account of his eyes, which were always opening real wide and then shutting tight, then opening again all on their own. He was the one who named his dog Blinky. Maybe it was the best name he could think of. Or maybe he knew he and that dog would get so close that you might as well call one as you call the other. Anyway, Blink loved that dog like nobody's business, even though Blinky was the most pathetic-looking creature you can imagine, with matted stinky fur, insect bite sores, and his tail broken so it hung at a right angle, halfway down. That didn't stop him from smiling and wagging at everybody he saw, though. I never knew a dog could smile until I met Blinky. Blink and Blinky were always at the marina. Dirty Dan kept a little pop-up camper around behind the parking lot, and that's where the three of them lived. It suited them fine. Blink hung around at the marina throwing a ball for Blinky and doing simple odd jobs for Larry sometimes. And all Dan had to do was roll out of bed and he was tarpon fishing. So Blink came grinning and Blinky came smiling and wagging toward me across the scrubby grass of the marina's picnic area. I knew exactly what Blink was going to do, and sure enough, he reached into his pocket and took out a quarter and said, "Want to flip, Skeet?" Ordinarily, I'd say sure, and Blink and I would play his favorite game, one that he never seemed to grow tired of. It was funny, but I never got tired of playing it with him. I guess because he got such a kick out of it. But this time, I was in a hurry, all puffed up with the importance of having an official police report to make. "Can't now, Blink," I said quickly. "I got something I gotta do." The corners of his mouth drooped and his eyes opened and closed quickly. "Uh-oh, Skeet's mad." "Don't be mad, Skeet." "I'm sorry. Blink's real sorry. Don't be mad." He looked ready to cry, and I felt like a real crumb. "Aw, Blink, I'm not mad," I said. "It's just that I gotta go with Earl and—" "Never mind. Give me the quarter. Let's flip." At that, his face lit up as if I'd given him a present or something. He handed me a quarter and I made a fist and positioned the quarter on the top of my thumbnail. "What'll it be?" I asked. Blink screwed up his face as if in thought and finally called heads. I popped my thumb and flipped the quarter into the air, caught it, and slapped my open palm into the back of my other hand. Blink and Blinky both watched me intently. Slowly, with dramatic flourish, I removed the top hand, revealing the quarter. Blink peered over to look. "Heads!" he crowed joyfully. "I win! Do it again, Skeet." I was already positioning the quarter for the next try. "What'll it be?" Again, Blink squinched up his face, but I knew what he was going to say this time. "Tails." I flipped, paused, and uncovered the coin. Blink looked. It was heads. His face fell into a tragic mask. He was as sad each time that he was wrong as he was happy when he was right. "Oh no, I lose. Do it again, Skeet." I flipped the quarter a few more times until he'd called it right twice in a row. Then I handed it back, saying, as I always did, "That's it, Blink. You're getting too good." He smiled happily and repeated, "I'm getting too good." Carefully, he returned the quarter to his pocket, saying, as he always did, "I'll save it for another day, right, Skeet?" "That's right. Save it for another day. Bye, Skeet." "See ya, Blink." I ran to catch up with Earl. He was waiting beside the police car, talking to Larry, who was on his way into the marina's office with the pontoon boat driver's credit card. "Sounds like you've had yourself quite a morning, Skeeter," Larry observed as he walked up to them. "Yeah, I guess," I answered. "Terrible thing," Larry said. "But I can't see where it would be tough to investigate without any evidence." All right, let's stop here, boys and girls. So Larry says, but you can see where it'll be tough to investigate without any evidence. What thoughts do you have about Larry? Okay, the text says, I scowled. Everybody agreed it was a terrible thing, so how come nobody except me wanted to do anything about it? "Well, I gotta go take this gentleman's money," Larry said, holding up the credit card. "I'll be seeing you." I was pretty discouraged when I got into the patrol car with Earl. He was quiet on the way to the station, and that made me feel a little guilty. If he was right and the sheriff and the fish and wildlife people weren't going to work too hard on the case, it wasn't his fault. Thanks for going out there with me, Earl, I said in a low voice. He was quiet for another minute, and then he nodded and said, I want you to know I'm going to try my best to get the boss fired up about this, Skeet. Come on, let's go see him. But the sheriff wasn't there. Earl helped me fill out a report about what I'd seen. Then he drove me back to the marina where I'd left my bike. I rode home, passing the trailer where Mac lived since he'd left permanently, it now appeared. Mom was at work at Quick Save, where she was the manager of a movie rental department. It seemed like a pretty good job, but she was always saying she wanted a better life for me. What do you mean better? I used to ask. Better than this, she'd say, throwing her arms out to indicate not only her job, but our house, the town of Chattahoochee Springs, our whole lives. But what's wrong with this? I'd say, her words making me feel puzzled and hurt. I liked our lives the way they were, at least the way they used to be before Mac had to go. Mom would get a sort of faraway, dreamy look on her face and say, Oh, Skeet, there's so much more out there. Why, you can be anything you want. I want to be a fishing guide. Oh, no, Skeet, no. You could be a rocket scientist, a doctor, maybe a researcher who discovers a cure for some horrible disease. Come on, Mom, I'd tease. With a last name like Waters, what else can I do but be a guide like Mac? She'd tease back. Why, you could be a scientist like Jacques Cousteau, a marine biologist, or... All right, boys and girls. So what is Skeet's point of view towards living in Chattahoochee Springs? What is his mom's point of view? How are they similar or different? The text says, she'd pause to think, then add, or a swimming pool manufacturer, or a cruise ship captain. Think of that. You get to travel all over the world. But I didn't want to be any of those things. And kidding around didn't change that. I wanted to be a fishing guide like Mac, and a legendary fisherman like Dirty Dan. I mean, how cool would it be to be known as the Tarpon Man? Why don't you do that stuff if you think it sounds so great? I asked. And Mom would look sad and say, I made my choice when I married your father. It's too late for me, but Skeet, you have your whole life ahead of you. Yeah, I always wanted to say, and it's my life, not yours. Lately, I'd stopped talking about how I planned to be a great fisherman and a guide because I didn't want to see the disappointment on her face. I knew what she thought of fishing guides, and I didn't want to get her started on her speech about their deviant lifestyle. How they got up at 4 in the morning and fell asleep in front of the TV at 6 o'clock at night, not leaving much time for what she called quality family life. How lots of them drank too much, and how they made lousy husbands and fathers because they cared more about fish than about their families. How there must be some kind of wild gene that caused them to spend day after day in the boat under the blazing sun with clients who half the time turned out to be jerks, hoping to stick a hook in a fish that they ended up releasing after they'd landed it anyway. In how she sure hoped her son had inherited that wild gene. Man. So anyway, Mom was still at work when I got home, but Meemaw, she's my grandmother, was in the living room, sitting at the sewing machine, stitching some glittery silver stuff onto her favorite denim cowgirl shirt. She looked up at me and smiled. I could tell right away that she was up to something. Skeeter, there's a big karaoke contest tonight at the River Haven Grill, and I aim to sing in it. You and your mama are coming to cheer me on. And that is the end of chapter 3.